Everyone noticed the woman the moment she stepped onto the wedding lawn, but not because they knew her. In fact, almost no one did. Guests shifted away, the bride froze, and the groom looked as if the past he'd buried had just walked straight into the light. They called her a stranger, an intruder, someone who didn't belong. But when the groom finally said her name, the entire wedding learned just how dangerous it is to underestimate the quietest person in the room, and how one truth can shatter an entire family in a single breath. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The summer sun hung high over Rosebridge Estate, casting golden light across perfectly manicured lawns that rolled down to a shimmering lake. White umbrellas dotted the outdoor venue like clouds fallen to earth, their fabric rippling gently in the afternoon breeze. Beneath them, wedding guests clustered in small groups, champagne flutes catching the light as laughter floated through the air. Everything about the scene screamed perfection, from the orchestra tuning their instruments near the gazebo to the cascading floral arrangements that framed every corner of the property. Then she arrived. Dr. Alana Mercer stepped from a town car at the entrance to the estate, and something in the atmosphere shifted. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s, moving with the kind of grace that came from years of carrying herself with dignity through rooms that didn't always welcome her. Her navy gown was elegant without being flashy, cut simply but expertly tailored to her frame. A single strand of pearls rested against her collarbone. Her natural hair was styled in soft silver-streaked locks pulled back from her face, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that held both warmth and something harder to define. Wisdom, perhaps, or pain that had aged into strength. She walked across the lawn toward the main gathering area, her heels sinking slightly into the grass with each step. The afternoon breeze tugged at her gown. She smiled politely at a passing server who nearly dropped his tray of canapés when he noticed her. And then, like ripples spreading across still water, the conversations began to die. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped or pointed, but heads turned, eyes narrowed. Whispers started and stopped abruptly. The clusters of guests seemed to tighten, shoulders angling inward, as if to exclude her from their circles. A woman in a peach dress clutched her husband's arm and leaned close to whisper something that made his eyebrows rise. An elderly man squinted at Alana, confusion creasing his face before he turned away sharply. Alana noticed. How could she not? But she didn't falter. She simply continued walking, her chin high, her expression serene. She'd clearly walked through hostile spaces before. Near the main tent, Claire Whitmore stood examining the seating chart with mounting anxiety. At 28, she was a bride who dreamed of this day her entire life. But now that it was here, she felt strangely disconnected from it all. Her wedding gown was exquisite, all ivory lace and delicate beading that caught the light with every movement. Her blonde hair was swept into an intricate updo that had taken 2 hours to perfect. She should have felt like a princess. Instead, she felt like she was watching someone else's wedding from behind glass. She glanced up from the seating chart just in time to see the strange ripple of tension move through the crowd. Her eyes followed the disturbance to its source and landed on Alana. Claire frowned slightly. Something about the woman's presence felt significant, though she couldn't say why. The elegance, maybe, or the way she held herself despite the obvious coldness radiating from the other guests. "Mother," Claire said quietly, touching the arm of the woman beside her. "Who is that?" Margaret Whitmore turned, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Her face went pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was a woman who prided herself on control, on maintaining appearances no matter what, but something about the sight of Alana Mercer on her daughter's wedding day shook her to the core. "No one," Margaret said quickly, her voice tight. She gripped Claire's wrist hard enough to hurt. "Stay away from her." Claire blinked, startled by her mother's intensity. "But I don't even know." "I said stay away." Margaret's eyes blazed with something Claire had never seen before. Not anger exactly. Fear, maybe, or something worse. Before Claire could press further, her mother released her wrist and walked stiffly toward a group of relatives, leaving Claire standing alone with a growing sense of unease. Across the lawn, near the stone archway that led to the ceremony site, Ethan Hale stood with his best man, nodding absently at whatever story was being told. He was 32, tall and conventionally handsome in his tailored tuxedo, with the kind of easy charisma that had served him well in both business and social settings. People liked Ethan. He was charming without being slick, confident without being arrogant. Today should have been the happiest day of his life. But when he glanced toward the main lawn and saw Alana's silhouette against the white umbrellas, all the color drained from his face. His best man, Ryan, was mid-sentence when Ethan's attention completely vanished. And then the guy actually tried to argue with the bouncer about, "Hey, you okay?" Ethan didn't respond. His eyes were locked on Alana. His jaw worked silently. His hands, which had been casually tucked into his pockets, now clenched into fists at his sides. "Ethan," Ryan waved a hand in front of his face. "Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine." Ethan managed his voice rough. He cleared his throat and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just wetting nerves." But it wasn't nerves. Claire thought it was nerves when she noticed his pallor a moment later. Ryan thought it was pre-ceremony jitters. But Ethan knew the truth. He was rattled, shaken to his core by the arrival of a woman he'd invited but never truly believed would come. Near the refreshment table, two servers in crisp white shirts paused their work to whisper urgently to each other. "Did you see her?" The younger one hissed, refilling champagne flutes with practiced efficiency. "The black woman in navy. Hard to miss her," the other replied, glancing over his shoulder. "She wasn't on the seating chart this morning. I checked it twice." Sandra at the check-in table nearly turned her away. "So she crashed the wedding?" "No, that's the weird part. She had an invitation. A real one, with the embossed seal and everything. And get this, it was signed by the groom himself." The younger server's eyes widened. "Etan hale invited her." Does the bride know? Judging by how everyone's acting? I doubt it. They fell silent as a guest approached for more champagne, but their eyes followed Alana as she moved gracefully through the hostile crowd. Daniel Hale, Ethan's older brother, noticed her too. He was 35, broader in the shoulders than Ethan, with the same strong jawline but harder eyes. Where Ethan had learned to charm people, Daniel had learned to intimidate them. It served him well as the enforcer of the Hale family's business interests. He strode directly toward Ethan, his expression dark. "Who the hell is that?" Ethan stiffened. "Who? Don't play dumb." "The mystery woman making everyone uncomfortable. Is she part of some charity work you forgot to mention? Some cause you donated to that thinks they get a wedding invitation." The condescension in Daniel's tone made something snap in Ethan. His brother had always looked down on his volunteer work, his mentoring programs, his attempts to use the family wealth for something meaningful. "She's not charity," Ethan said sharply, his voice harder than usual. "And you need to mind your own business." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. Ethan never talked to him like that. Never challenged him publicly. "Excuse me. You heard me." They stared at each other for a long moment, the tension crackling between them. Finally, Daniel stepped back, but his eyes moved past Ethan to lock onto Alana. He studied her with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle or identify a threat. Alana, for her part, was trying to navigate an impossible social situation with as much grace as she could muster. She approached a small circle of women near the flower arrangements, offering a warm smile. "Beautiful ceremony space, isn't it?" she said pleasantly. The women looked at her, then looked at each other. One of them gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, lovely." Another woman suddenly remembered something urgent she needed to tell her companion and turned her back completely. Within seconds, the entire group had drifted away, reforming their circle a few yards distant without Alana in it. The rejection was deliberate, calculated, cruel. Alana's smile faded slightly, but she didn't let the hurt show on her face. She'd experienced this kind of exclusion before. Not the blatant hatred of obvious racism, but the subtler version, the cold shoulders, the closed circles, the way people could make you invisible without ever saying a word. She moved to another group. The same thing happened, and then another. Each time, the pattern repeated. polite smiles that didn't invite conversation, sudden remembrances of things that needed doing elsewhere. A slow migration away that left her standing alone. But she didn't leave. Claire watched all of this from her position near the ceremony entrance. She was supposed to be focusing on her own preparations, touching up her makeup, and practicing her breathing exercises, but she couldn't tear her attention away from the elegant woman everyone was avoiding. There was something about her, something that made Claire's instincts prickle with recognition, even though she was certain they'd never met. The woman carried herself like someone who belonged, like someone who had earned her place in any room she entered. So why was everyone treating her like a threat? "Claire, darling, we need you for final photos," her maid of honor called out. But Claire didn't move immediately. Her eyes remained on the mysterious guest. Ethan saw his opportunity when Ryan was pulled away to help with a groomsman's crooked boutonniere. He started across the lawn toward Alana, his heart pounding. He needed to speak to her, needed to thank her for coming, needed to apologize for all the years he'd been too afraid to reach out. He made it halfway across the grass before freezing mid-step. What would he even say? How did you bridge 30 years of silence in the middle of your wedding reception? How did you thank someone for saving your life when you'd spent decades pretending they didn't exist? The internal conflict was written all over his face, gratitude wrestling with guilt, hope colliding with fear. "Ethan," Ryan called out, "we need you for the family photos before the ceremony starts." The moment shattered. Ethan turned reluctantly and walked back toward the photography area, but not before glancing over his shoulder one more time. Alana was watching him. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them that Claire, watching from the tent entrance, couldn't begin to interpret. Pride, grief, hope, fear, all of it, maybe. Margaret appeared at Claire's side again, making her jump. "I told you to stay away from her," she said, her voice trembling now. Actually trembling. Claire had never heard her mother's voice shake before. "Who is she?" Claire demanded. "Why is everyone acting so strange?" "Do not speak to that woman." Margaret's fingers dug into Claire's arm again. "Not today. Not ever. Do you understand me?" Claire pulled her arm away, disturbed by her mother's intensity. "You're scaring me." "Good," Margaret whispered, and there was something broken in her voice. "You should be scared of what she could do to this family." But before Claire could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared, cheerfully announcing that it was time for everyone to take their seats. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests began filing toward the rows of white chairs arranged before the flower-draped gazebo. Friends and family members found their designated seats, settling in with programs and tissues and cameras ready to capture every moment. Alana walked calmly to the very back row, the last seat in the last row, furthest from the aisle. She sat down alone, smoothing her gown and folding her hands in her lap with the same serene composure she'd maintained all afternoon. Around her, seats filled with laughing guests. But the chairs immediately beside her remained conspicuously empty, even as people squeezed together in other rows to avoid sitting near her. She didn't react. She simply sat, quiet and observant, watching the family that clearly didn't want her there with eyes that held decades of unspoken history. Her stillness held a kind of power, the power of someone who knew a truth no one else was ready to hear. The power of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment and would not be moved by coldness or rejection or fear. As the string quartet began playing the processional music, Alana remained perfectly composed in her lonely seat. But her hands, folded so carefully in her lap, trembled just slightly. The ceremony began with all the ritual beauty that money could buy. The string quartet's music floated across the lawn like something from a dream, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in warm gold. The officiant, a distinguished older man in flowing robes, took his position beneath the flower-draped gazebo and smiled beatifically at the assembled guests. Everything looked perfect. Everything should have been perfect. But there was a current of unease running beneath the surface, like a crack in marble that only certain people could see. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle first, each one looking radiant in their matching dusty rose gowns. Then came the flower girl, scattering petals with adorable concentration that made the audience coo appreciatively. The music swelled. Everyone stood. Claire appeared at the far end of the aisle on her father's arm, and there was an audible intake of breath from the guests. She looked stunning. The ivory lace of her gown caught the sunlight with every step, and her face glowed with the nervous excitement of a bride who dreamed of this moment since childhood. She walked slowly down the aisle, smiling at friends and relatives. But when her eyes found Ethan waiting for her at the altar, her smile faltered slightly. Something was wrong with his expression. He looked strained, distracted. His eyes kept flickering past her to the back of the seating area, to the woman in navy sitting alone in the last row. Claire's father placed her hand in Ethan's and sat down beside Margaret, who clutched her husband's arm like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. The officiant began his opening remarks, speaking of love and commitment and the sacred bonds of marriage. Ethan heard none of it. His attention kept drifting back to Alana, who sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't doing anything disruptive. She wasn't even looking at him directly. But her mere presence seemed to fill his awareness completely. The ceremony continued. Readings were read. Songs were sung. When the officiant invited Ethan and Claire to share their personal vows, Claire went first. Her voice was soft but clear, speaking of the day they met, the way Ethan had made her laugh, the life she dreamed of building with him. Then it was Ethan's turn. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket with trembling hands. Started to read. His voice came out rough and uneven. Claire, from the moment I met you, I knew. He paused, swallowing hard. His eyes lifted from the paper and found Alana in the back row. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. Ethan's breath caught. He stopped speaking entirely, the silence stretching too long. Ethan, Claire whispered, concerned. He blinked and forced his attention back to his bride. He cleared his throat. I knew that you were someone special, someone who could understand me, someone I could build a life with. The words were right, but his delivery was wrong. He stumbled over phrases. His voice cracked on certain words. He kept losing his place on the paper. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Most assumed he was simply overcome with emotion. Claire wanted to believe that, but she could feel the tension radiating from him, could sense that whatever was happening had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the mysterious woman everyone was avoiding. The ceremony moved into the symbolic portions. One tradition called for the bride and groom to light a unity candle together, representing the joining of their two lives. Claire and Ethan each took a small taper candle and stepped toward the large pillar candle waiting to be lit. Just as they touched their flames to the wick, a sudden gust of wind swept across the gazebo. The unity candle went out immediately, smoke curling up from the extinguished wick. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Bad omen." The officiant chuckled nervously and reached for matches to relight it. But before he could, Alana quietly rose from her seat in the back row. She moved forward, not all the way to the altar, but close enough. With a graceful gesture, she cupped her hands around the flame of the match the officiant was holding, shielding it from the breeze so it could stay lit long enough to relight the candle. It was a simple act of kindness. Practical, unobtrusive, but Claire noticed it, the gentle competence of the gesture. And when Alana caught her eye and smiled softly before returning to her seat, Claire felt something shift in her chest. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't the enemy her mother had made her out to be. Margaret, however, saw the same interaction and went rigid with horror. She actually shook in her seat, causing Peter to grip her hand tightly. "Not now," he whispered urgently. "Not here. Please." "She shouldn't have done that," Margaret breathed, her voice barely audible. "She shouldn't. She has no right." "Margaret, people are staring." It was true. Several guests in nearby rows had noticed Margaret's distress and were watching with curious concern. She forced herself to still, but her face remained deathly pale. Daniel Hale sat in the front row on the groom's side, watching everything with growing conviction that something was very wrong. He'd known Ethan his entire life, and he'd never seen his younger brother this shaken. Not during business crises. Not during family conflicts. Never. His eyes kept moving between Ethan's strained face and Alana's calm presence in the back. He started running through possibilities in his mind. Old girlfriend? No, she was too old. Business associate? Possible, but why would that cause this kind of tension? Some connection to the family's past? That last thought made him uneasy. The Hale family had worked hard to bury certain chapters of their history. If Alana represented one of those chapters crawling back into the light, there would be consequences. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd spent years protecting the family's reputation and business interests. He wouldn't let anyone, not even at his brother's wedding, threaten that. Meanwhile, in the third row, Claire's grandmother Evelyn sat perfectly still, her elderly eyes fixed on Alana with an expression of growing shock. She was 83, and her memory wasn't what it used to be, but certain things never left you. Certain faces, certain names. She squinted, studying Alana's profile, the elegant bearing, the facial structure, and then, slowly, recognition bloomed across her weathered features. Her lips moved silently, forming a word. Mercer? But no one sitting near her noticed. They were all focused on the ceremony, on the beautiful bride and nervous groom. The officiant reached the crucial moment. Ethan Hale, do you take Claire Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part. Ethan opened his mouth to respond. The words should have been immediate, automatic, but instead there was a pause, just a heartbeat too long, as his eyes found Alana in the back row. She was crying, silently, with perfect dignity, but definitely crying. Tears tracked down her cheeks, catching the golden afternoon light. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. Guilt, gratitude, grief for all the years he'd let fear keep him from acknowledging her. The simple words, I do, felt impossibly inadequate for the moment. Ethan, the officiant prompted gently. Claire felt a cold pinch in her chest. Why was he hesitating? Why did he look like he was being torn apart? I do, Ethan finally said, but his voice broke on the words. The ceremony continued, but the damage was done. Everyone had felt that terrible pause, that moment of doubt that no bride should have to experience on her wedding day. As the officiant moved through the remaining rituals, a distant cousin of the Hale family, a woman in her 40s named Patricia, decided to take matters into her own hands. During a lull in the ceremony while the rings were being blessed, she stood and made her way back to where Alana sat. She leaned down and whispered, loud enough to be rude, but quiet enough to avoid disrupting the ceremony completely. I think you might be at the wrong venue. Easy mistake to make. Alana looked up at her with those calm, knowing eyes. I assure you, she said quietly but with unmistakable authority, I belong here. Patricia's face flushed. There was something in Alana's tone, not angry, not defensive, just utterly certain, that made her retreat without another word. But as she returned to her seat, she whispered furiously to her husband, and the gossip spread through that section of guests like wildfire. Who did that woman think she was? Why wouldn't she leave when it was obvious she wasn't welcome? Claire caught pieces of the whisper drama. Her mind was working furiously now, trying to connect dots that didn't quite line up. Why did everyone older than her, her mother, her grandmother, the older relatives and family friends, react to this woman with fear or avoidance? Why did Ethan look devastated every time he glanced at her? And why would someone this graceful and dignified, someone who clearly had poise and education and means, subject herself to such obvious hostility? Unless she had a reason, a powerful reason. The ceremony reached its conclusion. By the power vested in me, the officiant declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Ethan kissed Claire, and the audience applauded. But the applause was subdued, uncertain. The usual joyful energy of a wedding kiss felt muted, contaminated by all the strange undercurrents running through the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, the officiant announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Hale. More applause as the newly married couple walked back down the aisle together. Claire smiled and waved, but inside she felt like she was screaming. Something was terribly wrong. Her wedding day, the day she'd dreamed about since she was a little girl, felt like it was happening to someone else. As they passed the back row, Ethan's eyes found Alana one more time. She stood with the other guests, clapping softly, her face a mixture of joy and sorrow that Claire couldn't begin to parse. Alana remained standing as the other guests began filing out of their rows to head to the reception area. She watched the wedding party disappear into the main house for photos, watched the clusters of guests reform into their exclusive circles, and then she slowly sank back in her seat, suddenly looking every one of her 50-plus years. Her hands, which had been so steady all through the ceremony, now trembled visibly in her lap. She had come here today knowing it would be difficult, knowing she would face rejection and hostility. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were two very different things. Each cold shoulder, each whispered insult, each deliberate exclusion had carved another small wound into her heart. But she had also promised herself she would stay, that she would bear witness to this moment, no matter how painful. Because Ethan deserved to have someone here who knew the whole truth of who he was and where he came from, even if no one else wanted to acknowledge it. As the last of the guests left the ceremony area, Alana sat alone among the empty chairs, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes closed against tears that threatened to fall again. She had waited 30 years for this day, and somehow the waiting wasn't over yet. The ceremony had ended, but its strange tension lingered in the air like humidity before a storm. Guests made their way from the gazebo to the reception area, a sprawling lawn decorated with string lights and round tables draped in crisp white linens. A live band was setting up on a small stage, testing microphones and tuning instruments. Servers circulated with trays of champagne and appetizers. Everything looked magical as twilight began to settle over Rosebridge Estate. But Alana Mercer sat alone at table 17, an island of isolation in a sea of celebration. The table had placed cards for 8 people, but within minutes of the reception beginning, the other 7 designated guests had quietly relocated themselves. Some claimed they wanted to sit closer to the dance floor. Others suddenly remembered dear friends at different tables they simply had to catch up with. One couple didn't even bother with excuses. They simply picked up their place cards and walked away when they saw Alana settling into her seat. Alana watched them go with that same serene expression she'd maintained all day, but her fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her water glass. She took a small sip and set it down carefully, her movements precise and controlled. Around her, the reception came alive. The bar area swarmed with guests eager for cocktails and conversation. Laughter erupted from various tables. Old friends embraced. Children chased each other between the string lights while their parents called half-hearted warnings. It was exactly the kind of joyful chaos that made weddings memorable, except for the empty chairs surrounding one elegant woman in navy. The wedding photographer, an energetic man in his 30s named Marcus, worked the crowd with professional enthusiasm. He gathered groups for candid shots, arranged family portraits, captured dancing children, and toasting friends. His assistant followed behind him, adjusting lighting and managing equipment. Marcus noticed Alana sitting alone and started to approach, his camera raised. A photo of a solitary guest at a wedding could be striking, poignant. But before he got within 10 feet, the wedding coordinator, a woman named Sandra with a headset and clipboard, practically threw herself in his path. "Family photos only right now," Sandra said quickly, her smile tight. "We need to keep on schedule. I was just going to—" "Family only," Sandra repeated, more firmly this time. She positioned her body between Marcus and Alana like a human barrier. The bride's mother was very specific about the shot list. Marcus glanced past Sandra to where Alana sat, clearly confused about why he was being redirected, but he shrugged and moved on to photograph a group of bridesmaids near the bar. Sandra remained in place for a moment longer, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, before hurrying off to manage some other detail. But not before shooting one nervous glance back at Alana, her forehead shiny with perspiration despite the cooling evening air. Near the main house, away from the crowded reception area, Peter Whitmore had pulled Ethan aside with a grip firm enough to bruise. They stood in the shadow of an old oak tree, partially hidden from view. Peter's usually composed face was twisted with anger and fear. "Why did you invite her?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but intense. "After everything? After all these years?" Ethan pulled his arm free, his own face flushed. "Because she deserves to be here, Peter. More than any of us. Actually, you have no idea what you've done." Peter's voice cracked slightly. What this could mean for? For what? The family's precious reputation. Ethan's words came out sharper than he'd intended. Maybe it's time the truth came out. Did you ever think of that? Peter went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your wedding day is not the time for." "When will be the right time?" Ethan challenged. "Next year? 10 years from now? Never? Because that's what you've all been banking on, isn't it? That if you waited long enough, pretended long enough, everyone would just forget." "Ethan, please." Peter's anger dissolved into something that looked distressingly like pleading. "Think about Claire. Think about what this will do to her." For the first time, Ethan's certainty wavered. He glanced toward the reception area where Claire stood with her bridesmaids, laughing at something, but with a strain around her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. His wife. His brand-new wife who had no idea that her wedding was about to become the site of a 30-year-old reckoning. "I should have told her before," Ethan said quietly. "I should have been honest from the start." "But you weren't," Peter said, seizing on the moment of doubt. "And telling her now, in front of everyone, will only hurt her more. Is that what you want?" Ethan didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving Peter standing alone under the oak tree, looking suddenly very old and very afraid. Back at the reception, Daniel Hale was conducting his own investigation. He'd cornered two of the older guests, friends of his parents from the business world, and was asking pointed questions about anyone named Mercer. The couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Why are you asking about this now?" The husband, Gerald, asked carefully. "Because there's a woman at this wedding who apparently knows my family," Daniel said, his voice pleasant but his eyes hard. "And I'd like to know how." The wife, Patricia, fidgeted with her pearl necklace. "Daniel, some things are better left in the past." "What things?" "We really shouldn't." "What things?" Daniel repeated, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Gerald sighed heavily. "There was a situation. Years ago, before you were born, actually, something involving your aunt. My father's sister, Anna." The couple went very still at the name. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "That's not a name we're supposed to mention," Gerald said quietly. "Your parents made that very clear." Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd grown up knowing his father had a sister who died young, but the family never spoke about her. Every time he'd asked as a child, he'd been shut down or redirected. Eventually, he'd stopped asking. But now, watching that woman in navy sit alone while his brother fell apart, Daniel realized the family's silence had been hiding something much bigger than he'd imagined. "Is she?" Daniel nodded toward Alana's table. "Is she connected to Anna?" But before either could answer, the band started playing and the wedding coordinator's voice rang out over the sound system, announcing that dinner would be served shortly. The couple seized the excuse to escape, practically fleeing toward the bar. Daniel stood alone, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick search. Mercer Beaumont Street Fire. His thumb hovered over the search button, but then he shoved the phone back in his pocket. Whatever he was about to uncover felt too big to do alone in the middle of his brother's wedding reception. But he would find out, one way or another. At table 17, a small miracle occurred. A flower girl, the same one who'd scattered petals during the ceremony, wandered over, clutching a cupcake with pink frosting in both hands. She was maybe 5 years old, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. She stopped in front of Alana and held out the cupcake. "You look sad," the child announced with the brutal honesty only children possess. "Cupcakes help when you're sad." Alana's carefully maintained composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time all day. She accepted the cupcake with both hands like it was something precious. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's very kind of you." "You're welcome." The child beamed, then scampered off toward her parents before anyone could stop the interaction. But several guests had witnessed it. A group of women at a nearby table leaned together, whispering furiously. "Did you see that? She's acting like she belongs here, like she's family or something." The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Claire had been trying to focus on her guests, to play the role of gracious bride, but her attention kept drifting back to table 17. She'd watched the little girl give Alana the cupcake. She'd seen the genuine warmth in the woman's smile, the tears that suggested deep wells of emotion beneath that calm surface. She couldn't stand it anymore. Ignoring her mother's glare from across the reception area, Claire stood and walked directly toward Alana's table. Her bridesmaids called after her, confused, but she didn't stop. The closer she got, the more certain she felt that this was important, that this woman held answers to questions Claire hadn't even known to ask. "Hello," Claire said as she reached the table. Her wedding gown rustled as she sat down in one of the empty chairs. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I am Claire." Alana looked up, and for a moment, something like panic flashed across her face. But it quickly softened into warmth. "I know who you are. You look absolutely beautiful today." "Thank you." Claire studied Alana's face, searching for clues. "And you are?" "Alana. Alana Mercer." The name meant nothing to Claire, but she could see it meant everything. She'd come. She'd borne witness. Perhaps that was enough. But she'd barely taken 10 steps before Ethan appeared in her path, moving fast, his face pale with panic. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "Please don't leave. Not yet. Ethan, I think it's better if I need you to stay." He glanced around at the guests who'd stopped mid-conversation to watch this exchange. His hands trembled at his sides. "I should have come to you years ago. I should have asked your forgiveness before today." Alana's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You have nothing to ask forgiveness for. You were a child, but I'm not a child anymore." His voice grew stronger, louder. Other guests were definitely watching now. "And I've been a coward. For years, I've been a coward. You're not. I am." He took her hands in his. "Please, stay. Let me finally do what I should have done a long time ago." The desperation in his voice was impossible to ignore. Alana searched his face and saw the boy she'd once known, the frightened child she'd carried from burning wreckage, in the man he'd become. She nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." Ethan and Alana stood together in the middle of the reception lawn, their clasped hands visible to everyone. The band had stopped playing mid-song, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Conversations died as heads turned toward the strange scene. Claire appeared at Ethan's elbow, her face tight with confusion and hurt. "Ethan, what's going on?" Before he could answer, Margaret Whitmore stormed across the lawn like an avenging angel, her elegant gown swirling around her legs. Peter followed close behind, his face gray with dread. "Ethan," Margaret said through gritted teeth, her voice low but venomous. "What do you think you're doing? Why should I have done years ago?" Ethan's voice was steadier now. He'd made his decision. There was no going back. Not here. Not at your wedding. Especially here. Especially today. He turned to Claire, who looked between him and her mother with growing alarm. "Claire, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before we got married." "You're scaring me," Claire whispered. "I know. I'm sorry. But you deserve the truth." He took a breath, still holding Alana's hand. "This woman, Dr. Alana Mercer, she's not just a guest. She's no one." Margaret interrupted sharply, desperately. "She's trying to manipulate you, trying to insert herself into our family." "Our family." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "She has more right to be here than half the people at this reception." The guests who'd gathered close enough to hear gasped. Someone pulled out their phone to record. The wedding coordinator looked like she might faint. Margaret grabbed Ethan's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "I am begging you. Do not do this. Do not ruin your wedding day with her lies." "They're not lies." The voice came from the edge of the growing crowd. Claire's grandmother, Evelyn, stepped forward with painful slowness, leaning heavily on her cane. Her elderly face was set with determination. "And you know it, Margaret. We all know it. Mother, please. Peter started, but Evelyn waved him off. I'm 83 years old. I've kept silent long enough. She looked at Alana with something like wonder. Your mother was Teresa Mercer. I knew her. She worked at the hospital where I volunteered for 30 years. Alana nodded, tears streaming down her face now. She did. She was a nurse. A wonderful nurse, Evelyn confirmed. And she raised a remarkable daughter. She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying despite her age. This woman deserves our respect. More than that, she deserves our gratitude. And the fact that she's been treated like an intruder at this wedding is a disgrace. Margaret's face contorted with fury and fear. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. Evelyn's voice was sharp. I understand that this family has spent 30 years hiding from the truth. I understand that we've pretended certain things never happened because it was easier than facing what we'd done, or what we'd failed to do. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Claire looked between all the adults around her, feeling like the only person who didn't understand the language being spoken. Will someone please just tell me what's happening? She cried out, her voice breaking. Who is she? Why is everyone acting like she's dangerous? Ethan turned to face his bride fully. His eyes were red-rimmed. Her name is Alana Mercer, and she saved my life when I was 4 years old. Claire's eyes widened. What? Ask him about Beaumont Street, Alana said softly, echoing the cryptic hint she'd given Claire earlier. Ask him about the fire. Claire grabbed Ethan's arms. What fire? What's she talking about? But before Ethan could answer, Daniel pushed through the crowd, his face dark with anger and something else, betrayal. Maybe hurt. He'd spent the last hour searching through old news articles on his phone, piecing together a history his parents had deliberately hidden from him. Beaumont Street, Daniel said flatly, staring at his brother. That's where our Aunt Anna lived. The aunt we were never allowed to talk about. The aunt who died in an apartment fire 30 years ago. The crowd's murmur grew louder. This was better than any reality TV show. This was a real family's secrets exploding in real time. And you, Daniel turned to Alana, his expression complex. You lived in that building. You pulled Ethan out of the fire. I found the old news articles. They interviewed you. Local woman saves child from burning building. There was even a photo, though you looked a lot younger. I was 25, Alana said quietly. My son was 6. The past tense hung in the air. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Your son? Alana's voice broke. He didn't make it out. I went back for Ethan instead. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the most gossip-hungry guests seemed struck by the weight of what they were hearing. A woman had lost her child, saving someone else's. And that someone else was the groom standing before them. Ethan made a sound, half sob, half gasp. I didn't know. I was so young. They never told me. They never told you a lot of things, Daniel said bitterly. He looked at Peter, at Margaret, at all the older relatives who clearly knew parts of this story. Did they? Peter stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. We were trying to protect him. He was traumatized. The doctors said he should forget his mother existed. Daniel's voice dripped with sarcasm. That he should grow up thinking he was born into the Hale family instead of being brought into it. That the woman who saved his life should be erased from his history. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Daniel demanded. His anger wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about himself, too. I spent my whole life being the responsible son, the one who protected the family business, the one who carried the Hale name with pride. And all that time, I was competing with a brother whose entire childhood was a lie. Daniel, Ethan started. No, Daniel's voice was cold. You don't get to comfort me right now. He gestured helplessly at the whole situation. This is insane. Claire gone very pale. She looked at Ethan like she was seeing a stranger. You never told me any of this. We've been together for 3 years. We got married today, and you never thought to mention that you were rescued from a fire? That your mother died when you were 4? That everything about your childhood is different than what I thought. I was trying to protect you. Don't, Claire said sharply. Don't tell me you were protecting me. You were protecting yourself. You were keeping secrets because you were too afraid to face them. The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Margaret saw her opening. You see, this is exactly what she wanted. To come here and destroy. Stop. Alana's voice cut through Margaret's words with unexpected force. I did not come here to destroy anything. I came because Ethan invited me. Because he reached out 6 months ago and asked me to be here. Because after 30 years of silence, he finally wanted the truth. Everyone turned to stare at Ethan. 6 months ago, Claire's voice was barely a whisper. You've been planning this for 6 months? Ethan couldn't meet her eyes. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to explain. Try. Claire's composure shattered completely. Try explaining why my husband has been lying to me for our entire relationship. I wasn't lying. You just what? Forgot to mention your entire childhood was fabricated? Forgot to mention you had a dead mother no one talks about? Forgot to mention this woman. She gestured at Alana. Saved your life at the cost of her own child. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the ground. The sharp crack punctuated Claire's words perfectly. Servers had stopped circulating. The band members stood frozen with their instruments. The wedding coordinator had given up trying to manage the situation and simply stood watching with horrified fascination. Alana stepped forward, her voice gentle despite the chaos. Claire, I know this is overwhelming. Overwhelming. Claire laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. This is my wedding day. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And instead, I'm finding out that my husband, my family, everything I thought I knew is built on lies. Not lies, Evelyn interjected softly. Omissions. Carefully curated omissions. Which, I grant you, amounts to much the same thing. Margaret turned on her own mother. How dare you take her side? I'm not taking anyone's side, Evelyn said firmly. I'm standing on the side of truth, which is where I should have stood 30 years ago, instead of letting you and Peter bury this poor woman's sacrifice. We gave Ethan a good life. Peter protested, his voice desperate. We raised him. We loved him. We gave him every advantage. After stealing him from his history, Alana said quietly. After erasing his mother. After making sure he never knew where he came from. His mother was dead. Margaret shrieked, completely losing her composure now. What were we supposed to do? Let him grow up knowing he came from nothing? From poverty and tragedy? You were supposed to let him know who saved him, Alana replied, her voice still calm, but her eyes blazing now. You were supposed to acknowledge that a black woman gave up her own child to save him. You were supposed to say thank you. The words hung in the air, and suddenly the racial dimension of the situation became impossible to ignore. All day, guests had avoided Alana. All day, they treated her like she didn't belong. And now, hearing the full story, some of them began to understand what they'd been part of. A woman in the crowd started crying. A man put his head in his hands. Even some of Margaret's staunchest social allies looked uncomfortable. Claire stood in the center of it all, her beautiful wedding gown seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds. She looked at Ethan, at Alana, at her mother and father and grandmother, at the wedding that had transformed into a courtroom where decades-old sins were finally being judged. She started, then stopped. Started again. I need a minute. I need to think. She turned and walked toward the main house, her bridesmaids rushing after her. The crowd parted for her automatically, everyone's eyes tracking her progress until she disappeared inside. Ethan started to follow, but Daniel caught his arm. Give her space, brother. She needs to process. For once, Ethan didn't argue. He just stood there, looking lost and broken in his expensive tuxedo. Margaret pointed a shaking finger at Alana. This is your fault. You should have stayed away. You should have let the past stay buried. The past never stays buried. Margaret, Alana said wearily. It just waits and waits until finally someone has the courage to dig it up. She looked at Ethan, her eyes full of complicated emotions. I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened this way, but I'm not sorry for coming. You deserve to know the truth, even if it hurt. Ethan nodded mutely, unable to speak. The reception had transformed into something else entirely. Guests clustered in small groups, whispering urgently. The servers began quietly clearing tables, sensing the evening was essentially over. The band packed up their instruments without being asked. Margaret stood isolated, her perfect facade completely destroyed, mascara running down her face. Peter hovered nearby, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Daniel, conflicted and angry and hurt, stared at both his parents with something close to hatred. And Alana, the woman everyone had avoided all day, stood at the center of it all, exhausted, sad, but somehow unbowed. The truth was finally out, but the real question was, what would everyone do with it now? The reception had descended into chaos, but somehow Ethan found the clarity to do what he should have done from the beginning. He walked to where the band had been set up, climbed the 2 steps onto the small platform, and raised his hand for attention. "Stop the music," he said, though there was no music playing anymore. But the symbolic gesture worked. Conversations ceased. Phones stopped recording. Every eye turned to the groom, standing on the stage, his tuxedo rumpled, his face streaked with tears. The entire reception fell into an unnerving silence. A server froze with a tray of empty glasses balanced on one hand. Children stopped running. Even the crickets in the surrounding woods seemed to quiet. The only sound was the gentle rustle of evening wind through the string lights. Margaret stood at the edge of the crowd, shaking her head violently, mouthing the word no over and over. But Ethan didn't look at her. He looked at Alana, who stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her like she was bracing herself. "Her name is Dr. Alana Mercer," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "She's not a stranger. She's not an intruder. She's the reason I'm alive." A ripple of movement went through the crowd as people shifted, leaned forward, pulled out their phones again to capture what was clearly going to be a moment they'd talk about for years. "Some of you know parts of this story," Ethan continued. "The older generation, especially. But most of you don't know anything because my family worked very hard to make sure nobody knew. They buried the truth so deep that even I didn't know it until I was old enough to start asking questions they couldn't deflect anymore." Peter opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn placed a surprisingly strong hand on his arm and shook her head. For once, he stayed silent. Claire emerged from the house just then, her eyes red but her jaw set with determination. She moved through the crowd until she stood at the front, directly in Ethan's line of sight. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Hurt, yes, but also a demand for truth. Whatever happened next, she would hear it all. "What is going on?" Claire's voice rang out clearly. "Ethan, I need you to tell me everything. Right now. No more secrets." Ethan nodded. He stepped down from the platform and moved to stand beside Alana. She tried to step back to give him space, but he gently took her hand and held it where everyone could see. "I wasn't born into the Hale family," Ethan said. The words seemed to cost him something. "My mother was Anna Hale, my father's sister. She fell in love with someone the family didn't approve of, and when she got pregnant, they pushed her out, cut her off financially, erased her from the family history." Daniel's face had gone very still. He'd read about this in the news articles, but hearing it from Ethan made it real in a different way. "My mother moved to Beaumont Street," Ethan continued. "It was a poor neighborhood. Rough. She was struggling to make ends meet, working 2 jobs, try to raise me alone. And the Hale family," his voice hardened, "they knew where she was. They knew she needed help, and they did nothing." Margaret made a choke sound. Several guests turned to stare at her, judgment clear on their faces. "Alana lived next door to us," Ethan said, his voice softening as he looked at her. "She and my mother became friends. More than friends, my mother trusted her completely. Trusted her enough to make her my godmother." The word sent another ripple through the crowd. Godmother. That was a sacred designation. That meant family. Claire pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes wide. "When I was 4 years old, there was a fire," Ethan said. "An electrical fire in our apartment building. It spread fast. My mother," his voice cracked. "My mother died trying to get me out. And Alana," he turned to face her fully. "Alana ran back into a burning building and carried me to safety." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several women were openly crying now. Even some of the men looked shaken. "But that's not the whole story," Ethan said. He was crying too, tears streaming down his face without shame. Alana didn't just save some random kid. She made a choice. Because when she ran back into that building, her own son was still inside. The impact of those words was like a physical force. People actually stepped back. Someone screamed. A man near the back of the crowd bent over like he'd been punched. Alana stood perfectly still, tears flowing silently down her face, her dignity intact even as her greatest pain was exposed to hundreds of strangers. Her son's name was Marcus. Alana said quietly, speaking for the first time since Ethan had taken the stage. He was 6 years old. He loved dinosaurs and drawing and music, and I couldn't save them both. The raw grief in her voice was devastating. Claire found herself moving forward without thinking, pulled by something she didn't understand toward this woman who had suffered so much. After the fire, Alana brought me to the Hale estate, Ethan said. She gave me to my mother's family, the family that had abandoned her when she needed help. And instead of thanking Alana, instead of acknowledging what she'd sacrificed, his voice turned bitter. They took me in quietly, privately. They raised me as if I'd always been theirs. And they made sure Alana never saw me again. That's not true. Margaret burst out, finally finding her voice. We tried to compensate her. We offered her money. I didn't want money, Alana said, her voice cutting through Margaret's excuses with quiet force. I wanted to know that Anna's son was all right. I wanted to see him grow up. I wanted him to know who his mother was, where he came from, what she'd sacrificed for him. But you wouldn't allow it. We were protecting him, Peter said desperately. The trauma. He didn't remember anything. The doctors said it was better not to force the memories. The doctors said no such thing. Evelyn interjected sharply. You chose to let him forget because it was easier. Because acknowledging Alana meant acknowledging Anna. And acknowledging Anna meant admitting what this family had done to her. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Daniel was staring at his parents with something that looked like horror. You cut off your own sister? Your own flesh and blood. Peter's face crumpled. We thought we were doing what was best for the family. The family. Daniel's laugh was harsh. What about Anna? What about her family? What about her son? We raised him. Margaret shrieked, her voice breaking. We gave him everything. A good home, a good education, opportunities Anna never could have provided. But you didn't give him the truth, Alana said quietly. You didn't give him his history. You didn't let him know his mother. And you certainly didn't let him know me. Claire had reached Alana's side now. She stood there, this bride in her elaborate gown, staring at the woman her family had shunned. You lost your child saving my husband. Yes. And they repaid you by erasing you. Yes. Claire's face hardened. She turned to face her mother and father. How could you? How could any of you live with yourselves? Margaret reached for her daughter. Claire, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Claire said coldly, stepping back from her mother's touch. I understand that you're all cowards, that you were more concerned with appearances than with doing what was right. She turned back to Alana. I'm so sorry. For today. For all the years before today. For every single thing my family did to you. Alana's composure finally broke completely. She pulled Claire into a hug, and they stood there crying together, the bride and the godmother who should have been honored all along. The crowd fell silent again as Alana and Claire separated. There was a sense that something more needed to be said, that the full story still hadn't been told. Alana looked around at all the faces watching her, some sympathetic, some still skeptical, all waiting. She took a deep breath and began. 30 years ago, I was 25 years old. I lived in a small apartment on Beaumont Street with my son Marcus and my mother, Teresa. Her voice was steady now, the voice of someone who'd carried this story for decades and was finally being allowed to speak it aloud. Anna Hale moved into the apartment next door when she was 6 months pregnant. She was young, scared, and completely alone. The guests listened with rapt attention. Even Margaret had stopped protesting, though her face was ashen. We became friends immediately, Alana continued. My mother would make extra food and bring it over. I would sit with Anna in the evenings when she couldn't sleep, when the fear of becoming a single mother overwhelmed her. She told me about her family, about the Hales and their money and their pride, about how they'd given her an ultimatum: give up the baby's father or give up the family. She chose love, and they chose reputation. Peter flinched visibly at the words. When Ethan was born, Anna asked me to be his godmother. Alana's eyes found Ethan in the crowd. She said if anything ever happened to her, she wanted me to make sure he knew he was loved, that he came from love, even if his family didn't see it that way. Where was I during all this? Daniel asked, his voice strained. Where was our father? Your father knew where Anna was, Alana said. He would drive by sometimes. I saw him once sitting in his car across the street, just watching the building. But he never came inside, never knocked on the door, never offered help. Peter's face was wet with tears now. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But Margaret said, he looked at his wife. You said we couldn't enable her mistakes. Because I was trying to protect this family. Margaret's voice was desperate now, defensive. If we brought her back, acknowledged the child, the scandal would have destroyed us. The business partners, the social standing, everything we'd worked for. A woman died waiting for help that never came, Evelyn said flatly. That's what your priorities bought you, Margaret. Anna's death and Alana's grief and 30 years of lies. Alana continued as if she hadn't heard the exchange. Maybe she was too deep in her memories to surface for the arguments of the present. For 4 years, Anna struggled. She worked as a waitress during the day and cleaned offices at night. She was exhausted constantly, but she loved Ethan so much. Alana smiled through her tears. She would sing to him every night. Old lullabies her mother. Your mother, she nodded at Peter, had sung to her when she was young. Even when she was dead on her feet, she always sang to him. Ethan made a sound, a half sob, half gasp. I remember singing. I remember someone singing to me in the dark. That was your mother, Alana confirmed. She adored you. The grief on Ethan's face was terrible to witness. He'd lived 32 years without knowing his mother's love, and now it was being given back to him in words, in memories that weren't his own. The night of the fire, Alana's voice wavered, but she pushed through. It started just after midnight. Faulty wiring in one of the ground floor apartments. The building was old, full of code violations the landlord never fixed. The flames spread fast. She closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was the voice of someone reliving trauma, seeing it all again behind her closed eyelids. The smoke woke me up. I grabbed Marcus and ran for the stairs. My mother was visiting her sister that night. Thank God. But as we reached the ground floor, I heard screaming. Anna's voice. She was yelling for help, for Ethan. I could hear him crying. The reception was utterly silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just Alana's voice, painting a picture of horror. I got Marcus outside, handed him to a neighbor, and told her to keep him safe. And then I ran back in. Her voice broke. Anna was trapped. Part of the ceiling had collapsed between her and Ethan's bedroom. She was trying to move the debris, but she wasn't strong enough. She looked at me and said, Alana opened her eyes, tears streaming. She said, say my baby. Please, just save my baby. Claire had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears pouring down her face. I got through the debris, found Ethan huddled under his bed, terrified, coughing from his smoke. I wrapped him in a wet towel and picked him up. He was so small, so scared. He kept crying for his mama. Alana's voice was barely a whisper now. I tried to go back for Anna. I swear I tried. But the fire had spread. The smoke was too thick. And then I heard. She stopped. Couldn't go on for a moment. Ethan stepped forward and took her hands, holding them tightly. I heard Marcus screaming. Alana finished. He'd run back into the building looking for me. A 6-year-old boy, terrified, running in a fire to find his mother. And her voice shattered completely. I couldn't reach him. I had Ethan in my arms and I couldn't save them both. The anguish in her voice was unbearable. Several people in the crowd were sobbing openly now. Claire had sunk to her knees in her wedding gown, overcome with the weight of what she was hearing. The firefighters pulled me out. Alana continued mechanically. They found Anna's body in the hallway near Ethan's room. They found Marcus. She stopped. They found him in the stairwell. He'd been overcome by smoke. The firefighter who brought him out said he died quickly, that he didn't suffer. She looked up at the crowd, her face ravaged by grief, but her voice suddenly fierce. I lost my son saving Anna's, and I would do it again, because that's what you do when you love someone, when you promise to protect their child. You do whatever it takes, even if it costs you everything. Daniel turned to his parents, his face twisted with disgust. And how did you repay this sacrifice? Peter couldn't meet his eyes. We went to the hospital where they'd taken Ethan. Alana brought him to us. She was injured, burns on her arms, smoke inhalation. But she wouldn't stay for treatment. She just handed Ethan over and told us about Anna's last words, about her wish for us to take care of him. And then what? Daniel demanded. Margaret's voice was small, broken. We took him home. We told everyone he'd been with us all along. That Anna had, that she'd signed over custody before she died. She didn't sign anything, Alana said. She died trying to save her son. Your paperwork was fabricated. The legal implications of that statement rippled through the crowd. Several guests exchanged shocked glances. We tried to compensate you, Peter said desperately, turning to Alana. We offered you money for your medical bills for your loss. You offered me money to stay silent, Alana corrected gently. To go away and never speak of Anna or what happened. To let you erase the whole story and pretend Ethan had always been yours. Did you take it? Someone in the crowd called out. Alana's smile was sad. No, I didn't want money. I wanted to be part of Ethan's life. I wanted him to know his mother, to know what she'd sacrificed for him. But the Hales made it clear that if I tried to contact him, if I tried to tell anyone the truth, they would use their lawyers to destroy me. They would claim I was unstable, that the fire had damaged my mind, that I was making up stories to extort money from a wealthy family. Claire looked at her parents with something close to hatred. You threatened her? We were protecting Ethan, Margaret insisted weakly. You were protecting yourselves, Evelyn said coldly. You were ashamed of Anna for choosing love over status. Ashamed of Ethan for being born from that choice. And rather than face your own cruelty, you buried it under lies. She turned to Alana with trembling hands. Your mother, Teresa, she was the finest woman I ever knew. She treated every patient at that hospital like they were her own family. When my husband was dying, she held his hand through the worst of it. She sang to him, just like Anna sang to Ethan. And when he passed, she cried like she'd lost her own father. Alana's eyes widened. I didn't know you were there. When my father died in the fire, when I lost everything, you sent flowers. But there was no name on the card. I was a coward too, Evelyn admitted. Margaret forbade any contact, said it would complicate things. And I went along with it because it was easier than fighting. But I've regretted it every day since. The old woman walked slowly toward Alana and took her hands. Your mother would be so proud of you. Proud of the doctor you became. The life you built even after losing so much. Proud of your strength in coming here today. The two women embraced, and something shifted in the atmosphere. The hostility that had surrounded Alana all day began to dissolve. Guests who'd avoided her, who'd whispered about her, suddenly saw her clearly for the first time. Not an intruder, not a threat, a hero who'd been punished for her courage. Ethan stepped forward, his face wet with tears. He looked at Alana with an expression of such profound gratitude and grief that it hurt to witness. I should have come looking for you years ago, he said. As soon as I was old enough to understand what happened, I should have found you. But I was afraid. Afraid of what the truth might mean. Afraid of losing the only family I'd ever known. You were a child, Alana said gently, and then you were a young man trying to build a life. You don't owe me apologies. But I do, Ethan insisted. I owe you everything. My life. My chance to grow up and fall in love and stand here today. Everything I have. I have because you chose to save me instead of your own son. He sank to his knees before her, and the entire wedding held its breath. Thank you, Ethan whispered. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for giving me the chance to finally tell you I know what you did, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. Alana cupped his face in her hands, looking down at the little boy she'd once carried from flames, now grown into a man. You already are, she said softly. Anna's son became everything she hoped he would be. Kind, brave, true. She would be so proud. And then, in front of 300 witnesses, Dr. Alana Mercer, the woman everyone had avoided, the woman whose pain had been deliberately ignored for 30 years, was finally, publicly, given the honor she deserved. Ethan stood and embraced his godmother as the crowd erupted into applause. The truth was no longer buried, and the healing, perhaps, could finally begin. The applause that followed Ethan's embrace with Alana was genuine, heartfelt, and for many of the guests, tinged with shame. They'd spent hours avoiding this woman, whispering about her, treating her like an unwelcome intruder. Now they understood exactly what they'd been part of. The guilt was written plainly on dozens of faces throughout the crowd. Ethan stepped back from Alana, but kept hold of her hand. He turned to face the assembled guests, his jaw set with a determination that was new. Something had shifted in him during the telling of the story. He was no longer the polished, accommodating man who'd learned to navigate the Hale family's expectations. He was someone else now, someone who'd finally found the courage to choose truth over comfort. I need to say something else, Ethan announced, his voice carrying clearly across the reception lawn. The crowd, which had begun to disperse into smaller conversations, fell silent again. Something I should have said a long time ago. Daniel moved closer, his expression wary. He knew his brother well enough to recognize when something significant was about to happen. Ethan looked directly at Alana, his eyes bright with emotion. For 30 years, I've called Margaret and Peter my parents. I've been grateful for everything they gave me, the education, the opportunities, the life I've built. And I won't pretend that didn't matter. It did. It does. Margaret's face flickered with hope. Perhaps he was going to forgive them after all. Perhaps the family could move past this ugliness and return to normal. But Ethan's next words shattered that hope completely. But they also took something from me. They took my history. They took my mother's memory. And they took you. He squeezed Alana's hand. They took the woman who saved my life and made sure I never knew her name. Made sure I never knew what you sacrificed, what you lost. His voice grew stronger, more certain. I can't change the past. I can't bring back your son or my mother. But I can honor them now. I can make sure everyone knows the truth. And I can finally call you what you've always been, what you should have been allowed to be all along. He paused, his voice breaking with emotion. Godmother. The word resonated across the lawn like a bell. Simple, powerful, undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, though softer this time. This wasn't shock. It was recognition. Acceptance. This was the moment the title that should have been Alana's from the beginning was finally, publicly restored to her. Alana's composure crumbled. She covered her face with her free hand as tears poured through her fingers. Ethan, she whispered. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was gentle but firm. I've spent my whole life not having to. Not having to acknowledge hard truths. Not having to face uncomfortable realities. Not having to choose between loyalty and honesty. But that ends today. He released her hand and turned to face Margaret and Peter directly. The elderly couple stood together at the edge of the crowd, holding onto each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to debris. You gave me a good life, Ethan said to them. I won't deny that, but you built it on a foundation of lies and erasure. You made me complicit in dishonoring my mother and the woman who saved me. And I won't continue that legacy. Ethan, please, Margaret's voice cracked. Don't throw away everything we've built. The family, the business. The business. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think I care about the business right now? You think I'm worried about the Hale name and what this means for our reputation? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He didn't care about those things. They'd been drilled into him since childhood. The responsibility of the family name, the weight of the legacy, the importance of protecting what their ancestors had built. I'm done, Ethan said flatly. I'm done pretending my mother never existed. I'm done acting like Alana is some stranger instead of family. And I'm done letting fear and shame dictate how I live my life. What are you saying? Peter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that if being a Hale means burying the truth, then maybe I don't want to be a Hale. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone who heard them. Margaret actually swayed on her feet. You don't mean that. You're upset, you're emotional, but you don't mean. I do mean it. Ethan's voice was calm now, certain. I'll walk away from all of it. The company, the trust fund, the estate. All of it. If that's what it takes to live with integrity. Daniel's head snapped around. Ethan, think about what you're saying. That's not just your inheritance. That's our entire legacy. Generations of what? Ethan challenged. Pride, status? Money built on the backs of people we deemed unworthy of acknowledgement? Tell me, Daniel, what exactly are we preserving? Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but found he had no answer. He'd spent his entire adult life as the dutiful son, the responsible heir, the one who protected the family interests. But now, forced to articulate exactly what those interests were, he realized he wasn't sure anymore. Alana stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. Stop, please. I didn't come here to break your family apart. I didn't come to make you choose between them and me. You're not making me choose, Ethan said softly. They did. 30 years ago, when they decided their pride mattered more than honoring you. I'm just finally picking a side. But you'll regret it, Alana insisted, her voice urgent now. I've lived with loss, Ethan. I know what it means to sacrifice everything. And I'm telling you, don't do this out of anger or guilt. Don't burn down your life trying to rebuild mine. I'm not rebuilding your life. I'm building mine. He looked at her with such clarity that it took her breath away. For the first time in my life, I'm building something real, something honest, something I can be proud of. Claire, who had been watching this entire exchange in silence, finally moved. She walked through the crowd in her elaborate gown, the train trailing behind her like a white river. When she reached Ethan's side, she took his hand. I'm with you, she said simply. Ethan turned to her, surprise and gratitude flooding his face. Claire, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked at her own parents with eyes that held both love and disappointment. I married you today, knowing I was marrying into the Hale family. But I didn't know I was marrying into lies. And if you're choosing truth over tradition, then so am I. She turned to Alana, her young face set with determination. I know we just met. I know this is all overwhelming and complicated. But if you're willing, if you want to, I'd like you to be part of our lives. Not as some distant family friend we see at holidays. As his godmother. As someone who matters. Alana looked between the young couple. These two people she'd known for less than a day, who were offering her something she'd been denied for 3 decades. Family. Recognition. A place at the table. I would be honored, Alana whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. Anna would be so proud of you both. Margaret made a sound, half gasp, half sob. If you choose her over us, Ethan, there's no coming back from that. I hope you understand what you're throwing away. I understand perfectly, Ethan said, his voice steady. I'm throwing away shame and silence. I'm choosing honesty and integrity. And if that means I lose you, then I lose you. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Margaret stood frozen, her world crumbling around her. She'd spent 30 years protecting a lie, and now that lie was exposing her for exactly what she was, a woman who'd valued reputation over righteousness, status over sacrifice. Peter stepped forward, his face gray and haggard. Son, he started, then caught himself. Ethan, I know you have every right to hate us. What we did was, his voice broke. What we did was unforgivable. But please don't cut yourself off from Daniel. He had nothing to do with this. He deserves better than to lose his brother over our mistakes. Ethan looked at Daniel, who stood rigid and conflicted at the edge of the family circle. Daniel's jaw worked silently for a long moment. He'd been angry since the truth came out, angry at his parents for lying, angry at Ethan for keeping secrets, angry at himself for not seeing what was right in front of him all these years. But beneath the anger was something else. Hurt. The realization that his entire understanding of his family, his identity, his place in the world had been built on false foundations. I spent my whole life being your older brother, Daniel said finally. Teaching you the business, protecting you from Dad's temper, making sure you didn't screw up in ways that would embarrass the family. He laughed bitterly. But I wasn't your older brother at all, was I? I was your cousin. Your mother was my aunt, an aunt I never got to meet because our parents erased her. You're still my brother, Ethan said quietly. That hasn't changed, hasn't it? Daniel's voice was raw. Everything has changed. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. And now you're standing here, ready to walk away from it all, and he stopped, struggling. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm that brave. Ethan moved toward him, closing the distance between them. I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm just asking you to see clearly, to acknowledge what happened and who got hurt. Can you do that? Daniel looked at Alana, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. He saw the dignity in how she held herself, the strength it must have taken to come here today, knowing she'd face hostility and rejection, the grace with which she'd endured being avoided and insulted for hours before the truth finally came out. I'm sorry, Daniel said to her, his voice thick. I'm sorry for how I treated you earlier, for how I assumed you were here to cause trouble or extort the family. I was wrong. Alana nodded, accepting the apology with the same quiet grace she'd shown all evening. You were protecting your family. I understand that impulse better than you know. Something in Daniel's rigid posture softened. He looked at Ethan, and for the first time since childhood, there were tears in his eyes. I spent my whole life competing with you, being jealous when things came easier to you, when people liked you better. And all that time, you were carrying this weight of not knowing who you really were, while I had the luxury of certainty. You didn't know, Ethan said. That's not your fault. But I'm choosing to know now. Daniel took a breath, made a decision, and knowing means standing with you. Not because of some business legacy or family name, but because you're my brother, and you're doing the right thing. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He extended his hand. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then pulled his brother into a fierce hug. The two men held on to each other while the wedding guests watched, many of them crying openly at the raw emotion of the moment. When they separated, both had tears on their faces, but smiles breaking through. So what happens now? Daniel asked, wiping his eyes roughly. Now, Ethan looked at Claire, then at Alana, then at the crowd of guests who'd witnessed this entire impossible evening. Now we celebrate, because despite everything, despite all the pain and secrets and lies, we're here. We're together, and the truth is finally out. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. My godmother came to my wedding today, and I know the evening didn't go the way anyone expected. But I'm asking you all now, help me celebrate her. Help me honor her. Help me make up for 30 years of silence. The crowd erupted into applause. Real applause this time, not the polite golf claps of earlier. People were genuinely moved, genuinely invested in this family's messy, painful journey toward redemption. The band, who'd been standing by uncertainly for the past hour, began playing again. Soft music that filled the evening air. The wedding coordinator, recovering from her shock, signaled for the staff to resume service. The reception wasn't over. It was just beginning again with a completely different energy. Ethan turned to Alana and extended his hand with a small bow. May I have this dance? Alana looked at the offered hand, at the dance floor where other couples were beginning to sway to the music. Ethan, I'm not sure. Please, he said softly. Let me have this. Let me publicly honor you the way I should have done years ago. She took his hand. They walked onto the dance floor together as the band transitioned into a slower, more emotional song. Ethan placed one hand at Alana's waist, held her other hand gently, and they began to move. It wasn't technically a mother-son dance. This wedding had already had too many breaches of tradition for that, but everyone watching understood what it represented. A debt acknowledged, a sacrifice honored, a relationship restored. As Ethan and Alana danced, something magical happened. The reception transformed. The atmosphere that had been heavy with tension and secrets for hours suddenly lifted. People smiled, genuinely smiled. The joy that should have been present from the beginning finally arrived, earned through honesty rather than pretense. Other couples joined them on the dance floor. Claire was pulled into a dance by her grandmother Evelyn, who told her how proud she was of her courage. Daniel danced with his wife, holding her close and whispering that he needed to reevaluate some things about his life. Even some of the guests who'd been most hostile toward Alana earlier approached to apologize and introduce themselves properly. When the song ended, Claire stepped forward and tapped Ethan on the shoulder. "May I?" Ethan stepped back with a smile, and Claire took his place opposite Alana. The older woman looked surprised, but touched, as Claire led her in the next dance. "Thank you for coming today," Claire said quietly. "I know it must have been incredibly difficult." It was, Alana admitted, but it was also necessary. Some truths need to be spoken, even when they hurt. "Will you tell me about Anna?" Claire asked. "About who she was. I want to know the woman who gave birth to my husband." Alana's eyes filled with tears again, but she smiled. She was wonderful, stubborn and brave, and so full of love. She would have adored you. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment before Claire spoke again. "I want you in our lives, not just at holidays or special occasions. I want you to be part of our family. The real family, not the fake one built on lies." "I'd like that very much," Alana said softly. The reception continued with renewed energy. Dinner was served, though much later than planned. Toasts were made, some of them referencing the elephant in the room with gentle humor, others pointedly avoiding the drama entirely. The wedding cake was cut, champagne flowed, and slowly, impossibly, the evening began to feel like an actual celebration. But not everyone was celebrating. Margaret stood at the far edge of the lawn, alone for the first time all evening. Her husband had wandered off to speak with other relatives, unable to face her disappointment. Her daughter was dancing with a woman Margaret had spent decades trying to erase. Her son-in-law had publicly rejected everything she'd worked to protect. She watched Alana laugh at something Claire said, watched Ethan join them on the dance floor with a lightness he hadn't shown in years. She watched Daniel clap his brother on the shoulder with genuine affection rather than the competitive edge that usually colored their interactions. She'd lost, not just the battle of this evening, but the larger war she'd been fighting for 3 decades. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. It didn't have to be this way, a voice said beside her. Margaret turned to find Evelyn standing there, leaning on her cane. Her mother-in-law, who'd been a thorn in her side since the day she married into the Whitmore family. "Don't," Margaret said tiredly. "Don't lecture me. Not tonight." "I'm not here to lecture," Evelyn said. "I'm here to tell you that you can still fix this. Not completely, perhaps, but partially." "Ow!" Margaret's voice was bitter. "By apologizing? By pretending I didn't spend 30 years actively working to erase that woman from Ethan's life? There's no apology big enough for that." "No, there isn't," Evelyn agreed bluntly. "But you can stop making it worse. You can let go of your pride and accept that Alana has earned her place in this family. You can stop fighting a battle you've already lost." Margaret was silent for a long moment, watching the dance floor. Finally, she spoke. "I was trying to protect him and the family. I genuinely believed it was the right thing to do." "I know you did," Evelyn said, her voice gentler now. "That's what makes it so tragic. You convinced yourself that burying the truth was an act of love rather than cowardice." The words stung, but Margaret didn't deny them. She was too tired to deny anything anymore. Peter approached then, his face drawn. "Margaret, we should go. We're not wanted here." But before Margaret could respond, Alana herself appeared, separating from the crowd with purposeful steps. She stopped in front of the elderly couple, her expression unreadable. "I don't expect forgiveness," Margaret said quickly, defensively. "I know what we did was wrong, but I want you to understand." "I do understand," Alana interrupted gently. "You were afraid. Afraid of scandal, of judgment, of losing control. Fear makes people do terrible things." "That doesn't excuse it," Peter said quietly. "No, it doesn't." Alana looked between them, these two people who'd shaped so much of her pain. "But I didn't lose my son to hold on to hatred. I lost him trying to save someone else's child. And that act, that sacrifice, it taught me something about what matters and what doesn't." She took a breath. "What matters is that Ethan is alive, that he grew up safe and loved, even if the circumstances were wrong. What matters is that the truth is finally out, and we have a chance to move forward honestly. What doesn't matter is making you suffer for the rest of your lives." Margaret stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I choose to forgive you." Alana's voice was firm. "Not because you've earned it. You haven't. But because carrying that weight serves no one. Not me, not Ethan, not even you." Peter's eyes filled with tears. "We don't deserve that." "No, you don't," Alana agreed. "But grace has never been about deserving. It's about choosing mercy over bitterness, healing over perpetual wounds." Margaret's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. She wept, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and broken inside her. Peter put his arm around his wife, his own tears falling silently. "I'm so sorry," Margaret choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry for what we took from you, for the years you lost with Ethan, for dismissing your sacrifice, for everything." Alana didn't embrace them. The forgiveness she offered was real, but there were still boundaries, still pain that couldn't be erased with words. Instead, she simply nodded. "I know, and now Ethan knows too. That's what matters." She turned and walked back toward the celebration, leaving the elderly couple to their tears and their reckoning. The evening wore on. As night deepened and stars emerged overhead, the reception settled into its final phase. Children had fallen asleep in their parents' arms. Elderly guests had departed. The hardcore celebrants remained, dancing to the band's last few songs and finishing the last bottles of champagne. Ethan found a quiet moment with Alana near the edge of the dance floor. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in simple paper. "I have something for you," he said. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." Alana opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a simple cross with a tiny diamond at its center. "This was my mother's," Ethan said quietly. "The firefighters recovered it from the apartment. Peter gave it to me when I turned 18, told me it belonged to someone important. But he wouldn't say who. I kept it all these years, not knowing it was hers." Alana's hands trembled as she lifted the necklace from a box. "Anna wore this every day. Your grandmother gave it to her for her confirmation." "I want you to have it," Ethan said. "You knew her. You loved her. You tried to save her. If anyone should carry a piece of her memory, it's you." "Ethan, I can't." "Please," he insisted. "She would want you to have it. I know she would." Alana clutched the necklace to her chest, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving her back to me." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last dancers sway to the music. "What happens now?" Alana asked eventually. "After tonight, after all of this, now we build something new," Ethan said. "Claire and I want you to visit us. Often. We want to hear stories about my mother. We want to know you, really know you. Not as some distant figure from a tragic past, but as family." "I'd like that," Alana said softly. "And maybe," Ethan hesitated, "maybe you could tell me about Marcus. About who he was, what he loved. I want to know about the boy who should be here too." Alana's breath caught. In 30 years, almost no one had asked her about Marcus. His memory had been swallowed up by the larger tragedy, by the scandal of the Hale family secrets. But Ethan wanted to know, wanted to honor the child whose life had been traded for his own. He loved dinosaurs, Alana said, smiling through tears. And music. He wanted to be a paleontologist or a musician. He couldn't decide. He had your mother's stubbornness and my mother's kindness. He would have been, her voice broke. He would have been 36 years old now. Then we'll honor him, Ethan said firmly. We'll make sure his memory lives too. Not just Anna's, but Marcus's. They're both part of this story. Both part of who I am. Alana pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. This young man who'd been a terrified child in her arms 30 years ago. Anna would be so proud, she whispered. So incredibly proud of the man you've become. As midnight approached, Claire joined them, slipping her hand into Ethan's. The three of them stood together, the bride, the groom, and the godmother, watching the last guest depart and the staff begin cleanup. This was the strangest wedding in history, Claire observed, a hint of humor in her voice. But not the worst, Ethan countered. No, Claire agreed, squeezing his hand. Not the worst at all. Maybe even, in a weird, painful, complicated way, exactly what it needed to be. Alana looked at the young couple, their faces illuminated by string lights and hope. Every good thing starts with truth, she said, even when that truth is hard. Especially when it's hard. Daniel appeared then, having put his own children in the car with his wife. He approached the small group hesitantly. Alana, before you go, I wanted to say, I'd like to get to know you too, if that's all right. I'd like to hear about Aunt Anna from someone who actually knew her. I'd be honored, Alana said warmly. As the night finally wound down completely, the wedding coordinator approached with Alana's coat. Dr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. The way I treated you earlier. It's all right, Alana said gently. You were following instructions. I understand. Still, it was wrong. You deserve better. Sandra helped Alana into her coat. For what it's worth, this was the most memorable wedding I've ever coordinated. And I've done over 200. Alana laughed. A real, genuine laugh. I imagine you'll be telling this story for years. Decades, Sandra confirmed with a smile. As Alana prepared to leave, Ethan walked her to her car. The two of them stood in the parking area under stars, the sound of the reception a distant murmur behind them. Will I see you again soon? Ethan asked, sounding almost like a child afraid of abandonment. Yes, Alana promised. You'll see me as often as you want. I'm not disappearing again. Those days are over. Good. He hugged her one last time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not giving up on me. I never gave up on you, Alana said softly. Not for one single day in 30 years. She got in her car and drove away, leaving the estate behind. But this time, she wasn't leaving in rejection or sorrow. She was leaving with peace, with healing, with the knowledge that the little boy she'd saved had grown into a man who finally knew the truth. And sometimes, truth was the greatest gift of all. Back at the reception site, Ethan and Claire stood arm in arm, surveying the remnants of their chaotic wedding day. Overturned chairs, discarded programs, wilting flower arrangements, and the scattered debris of a celebration that had become something much more significant. We should probably feel upset about all this, Claire said thoughtfully. The drama, the secrets, the way our perfect wedding turned into a family intervention. Should we? Ethan asked. Claire considered, then smiled. No, because the woman who saved your life finally got to be acknowledged. Because your mother's memory was restored. Because we started our marriage with truth instead of lies. And honestly, that feels more important than perfect table settings. Ethan pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Have I mentioned that I love you? Once or twice today, she teased, though it got a bit lost in all the other revelations. They stood together in the mess and the beauty, the pain and the hope, knowing their marriage had begun in the most unconventional way possible. But it had begun honestly, and that was everything. Somewhere in the darkness, Margaret and Peter sat in their car, unable to drive away yet. They'd lost something tonight, their carefully constructed version of reality, their control over the family narrative, perhaps even their relationship with their daughter and son-in-law. But they'd also gained something, though they didn't recognize it yet. The possibility of redemption. The chance to finally face what they'd done and begin the long work of making amends. It wouldn't be easy. Some wounds didn't heal quickly. Some truths left permanent scars. But at least now, finally, after 30 years of silence and secrets, everything was out in the open. The woman nobody wanted at the wedding had become the woman the wedding could never forget. And in the end, that was exactly as it should be. If a single truth could rewrite your entire life, would you want to hear it? Like, subscribe, and stay with us for more gripping stories.